Jeff Anderson, and this is Jim Fitzpatrick. Jim is a former priest and former administrator in the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, and a former priest of the Diocese of Winona. He, as a priest and as an administrator, had several encounters concerning Father Tom Adamson having abused, and several encounters with the bishops attempting to conceal and suppress knowledge of that. He came forward with that information to us and was expected to testify at the trial of the Keenan case. And it was our hope and expectation that once he came forward to us and shared this truth with us, that he would be able to make it known. Given the fact that the Supreme Court tossed the case yesterday and there won't be a trial of the Keenan case, I felt compelled to invite Jim to come down and speak that truth today, and asked if he would, for the same reasons he came forward almost 2 years ago. And he is here out of conscience and to speak and share what he knew about what happened. And so you can come on in. And so what I'd like to do is ask you, Jim, first to tell us about you having been a priest in the Diocese of Winona. And then I'm going to ask you to tell us what happened concerning Adamson and Winona when you were assigned there as a priest. I'm going to ask you to speak up so you can be heard here.
Okay, I was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Winona, Minnesota on June 1st, 1963. I was an active priest in the Winona Diocese for 10 years, from 63 to 73. Well, I was my first assignment was to be an associate pastor at the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart in Winona and a teacher at Cotter High School. While I was at the cathedral, one evening, two sets of parents from Caledonia, Minnesota, came and they wanted to visit with me. Caledonia is 14 miles from my hometown. I'm a graduate of Loretto High School in Caledonia. I know the community real well, and the community knows me somewhat. So these parents came to me, and I was very surprised at what they had to talk about. They talked about the terrible abuse their sons were getting at the hands of Father Tom Adamson. And they were wondering what they could do about it. And I said, well, myself, I said, I can't do much about this, but what I can do, I will go and talk to the bishop about this situation. So the next day, after teaching at Cotter High School, I got an appointment with Bishop Fitzgerald at the Chancery office. I told the bishop about the parents that had visited with me the night before, and about the abuse not only of their sons by Father Adamson, but some 15 other junior high boys in Caledonia. After I had shared that all with Bishop Fitzgerald, he said, Father Fitzpatrick, where did I assign you? And I said, well, to the cathedral and to Cotter High School. He said to me, that's where you belong. Got up from his desk, he took me to the door of his office, opened the door, and I exited.
Jim, I'm going to have you pause for one moment.
Okay.
Jim, come on in here. Come on in here. This is Jim Keenan, And this is the courageous survivor with whom we have been working, Jim Fitzpatrick. You have never met Jim.
No.
And thanks for being here. And I was just having Jim tell a bit about what he has encountered. So I'm going to have you stand right next to him. And Jim, get back on the microphones, and I'd like you to continue. Jim, come on now, Jim.
Like I mentioned earlier, I was active priest in Winona Diocese for 10 years. After, in 1973,
I want you to focus. You told us about how you got a report from 2 parents, and you knew about 15 other kids having been abused by Adamson. And you brought that to the then Bishop Fitzgerald, who was in charge of the diocese, right?
Correct.
And you told him what you had learned and what you knew, right?
Right.
And what was Bishop Fitzgerald's response to you?
His basic one was the question about where I was assigned, and he said, I will take care of my priests. And the sad thing that happened after that, Father Adamson was moved from Caledonia to Lourdes High School in Rochester, and he was made the athletic director at Lourdes High School. I think that would pretty well...
And you now know he continued to abuse kids.
Yes.
And was moved from the Diocese of Winona in late 1974 to the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, right?
Correct.
Okay. You continued to be a priest in the Diocese of Winona until 1973?
Correct.
And then made a personal decision to leave the priesthood?
Yes.
And then tell us how you came to be working in the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis in the 70s and 80s, where Adamson was now assigned under the authority now of the Bishop of Winona and then Archbishop Roach and Bishop Carlson.
I left the active ministry in 1973. I got married in 1974, and my wife and I worked in a Catholic parish in Phoenix, Arizona from 74 to 1977. We wanted to come back to the Midwest, primarily because the church here was a little more open-minded and so forth, and we fortunately ended up being hired by both of us by Guardian Angels Parish in Oakdale. And we began our employment there in August of 1977. In 1981, the pastor of Guardian Angels Parish got a phone call from Bishop Carlson from the Chancery office, and Bishop Carlson said...
when you're talking about Bishop Carlson, we're now talking about what's now Archbishop Robert Carlson, Archbishop of St. Louis, who was then a priest of the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. He was also an auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. So in 1981, you get a call from Bishop Carlson.
And he tells the pastor that they would like to send Tom Adamson to Guardian Angels. The pastor had a reputation of being very good about chemical dependency and helping people with that terrible disease, and they thought it would be a good situation. The pastor buzzed me from the rectory. I was over at the parish center, and I knew that whenever I got buzzed from the rectory that there was something important take place. And he said, come over, I've got something I've got to talk to you about. So I went over to the rectory, and he told me about the call from Bishop Carlson wanting to send Adamson to Guardian Angels. And my immediate response was, if Adamson comes to Guardian Angels, my wife and I are out of here tomorrow morning. I said, I will bet any amount of money that Adamson's abusing boys again. But I said, we will find out. I said, you go to the dining room and get on the extension phone, and I'm going to call Winona, and we'll find out. At Winona at that time, the Vicar General was Father Donald Schmitz. He's 2 years younger than me in ordination. He's also a hometown boy from Caledonia, Minnesota. So I get Father Schmitz on the line. We have a little Caledonia talk, and I'd say, Donnie, I need a favor. I said, we just got a call from Bishop Carlson, and the Chancery wants to send Adamson to Guardian Angels, and we want no part of it. And I said, I suspect he's abusing boys again, and I want an answer from you on that. Is that the case? And he said, yes, unfortunately, it's the case.
Is that why he was being transferred again? Right?
Pardon me, I have a hearing.
That's why he was being transferred again to Guardian Angels, because he was
Yes, yeah,
again.
yeah.
Yeah. The record already established that he was caught again in the Archdiocese abusing boys in former parish. So Bishop Carlson, under oath, was looking for another parish for him when he made the call to Guardian Angels to try to place him there after having been caught again, probably for the 10th or 11th time.
Jim, what was your role at Guardian Angels?
I was a parish administrator. I was responsible for the entire staff, for finances, the basic operation of the parish, to free up the pastor to do what the pastor was ordained to do in terms of the faith life of the community.
Did Father Donnie Schmitz, I believe?
Schmitz, Schmitz.
Did he give you any other details about this incident?
No, other than, and the incident was at Immaculate Conception Parish in Columbia Heights here in the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis.
And it's documented that Adamson abused a number of boys at Immaculate Conception Parish before he was moved to Risen Savior and before they tried to move him to Guardian Angels. So after you got the call to the Vicar, after it made the call to the Vicar General to confirm that they were moving Adamson because he's been abusing again, and Vicar General Schmitz confirmed that to you, what happened, Jim?
The pastor then called Bishop Carlson and just told him that he didn't think that situation would work with Adamson coming to Guardian Angels. And unfortunately then, Adamson was assigned to Risen Savior in Apple Valley, Burnsville.
And it was in Apple Valley, Burnsville, that he was assigned to Risen Savior, where he abused then Jim Keenan as a young teen. Jim is here as an adult now. And here is Adamson. Jim wants to the side. Here's Jim as a youth. And here's the then pastor, Cussler. And here is then Bishop Carlson with Jim Keenan. Was that at your confirmation? At his confirmation as a teen. Jim, before we hear from Jim Keenan, I would like you to tell folks about what happened with Bishop Carlson after you put the brakes on the assignment of Adamson to Guardian Angels and he got assigned to Risen Savior. Did you have any further dealings with Carlson about Adamson? And if so, what happened?
I had a phone call several years later, I think it was in 1988, and Bishop Carlson wanted to have lunch with me. And he invited me to lunch, and he made it very clear, I will pick up the tab, and we're going to Jack's in Northeast, University Avenue. So I went to that meeting. We had a nice lunch, and in the course of the lunch, he said to me, he said, Jim, he said, I know that you know that I tried to send Adamson to guardian angels. And he said, Jim, I want you to know that you are free to go to the press or to the police about this matter if you so desire. And that was kind of the basic end of the conversation. But at that same time, I was aware of another parish in the Archdiocese where the pastor was abusing young boys, and 2 staff members went to the chancery to report that to Bishop Carlson to see if Carlson would do anything about it. Carlson listened to the whole report about the abuse and so forth, and at the end of the conversation from the 2 staff members, he said, if you go to the press or to the police, I will see to it personally that you will never work in this archdiocese or any archdiocese in the country. That tape was playing in the back of my head. I did not trust Carlson. And I basically stuffed the information I had for a number of years. And very honestly, because I was afraid I would lose my job. At that time in the Archdiocese, the employment policy was employment at will, which you could be fired for anything at any time. Fortunately, the policy has changed since then, but that was the policy at that time. Why have I come forward now? 2 reasons. One, I retired in 2002. I'm no longer employed by the Archdiocese, although I am a beneficiary of the Archdiocesan pension program. Second reason, in 2008, my wife and I were visiting a dear friend of ours who is now deceased, but Father Mark Schmieder in Cincinnati, Ohio. Father Schmieder was very active in the program entitled SNAP, S-N-A-P, Survivors of Sexual Abuse by Priests. I told him basically the story that I've shared with you folks, and Father Mark said, Fitz, you've got to tell this to somebody. He said, the person you've got to tell it to is Jeff Anderson right there in St. Paul. So I came back from that trip to Cincinnati, and I think it was within the week. I made a telephone call to Mr. Anderson's office, arranged for an appointment, told them basically my story, and we talked, and he said, this will probably be a very crucial bit of information that we may need down the line, and I would like to have a deposition with you sometime. And so eventually that happened a year ago. I think it was in May of 2011. I gave a deposition in this regard. So I'm speaking today basically out of conscience in this regard, that I've got a piece of the truth that needs to be to get out into the public realm and to set the record straight on this particular matter of Bishop Carlson and Tom Adamson.
Well, Jim Fitzpatrick, we want to thank you for coming forward and speaking truth out of conscience. I know you do it for the right reasons, and I also know that you do it out of concern for the kids, the same concern that Jim Keenan has. Contextually, I think in the packet of materials there's a few pieces of additional information that are documented in the Adamson file. One is the 1975 letter from Bishop Waters that talks about Adamson abusing in 5 different communities, and that's why they moved him to the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. The second is the letter of June 29, 1984, from Carlson to then Archbishop Roach. And in it, they're calculating the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution of Adamson. They know that Adamson could be prosecuted, and they know that they have 2.5 years left on that time before he could be arrested, and this would be public. And they figured if they can keep it under wraps for another 2.5 years, the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution will be out. That's what this document shows. It's quite sordid, but it's quite revealing. We also have in this packet the July 9th, 1984 letter that shows in a memo from Carlson, Bishop Carlson, to then Archbishop Roach, that Carlson is interviewing Adamson again after a report. And Adamson has admitted to sexual activity, and he states, "I did not go into the sexual activity, but rather Adamson agreed that it probably would be first-degree criminal sexual conduct." These letters are included and highlighted because they demonstrate a pattern of callousness and cover-up by the Archbishop and by Bishop Carlson, now Archbishop in St. Louis, that continues to this day, and continued to the point at which time Jim Keenan was abused and after. And so Jim is here today with us and to share his views about why he's here. And Jim, before I do, I've already told the folks, those that just arrived, that you are the survivor, that you are the one of the kids that Adamson abused at Risen Savior. You came to us in 2004 or 3, and your case has been winding its way through the courts since then, and it was tossed yesterday, thrown out. And in that case, we had also forced a disclosure of the lists of those priests that were offenders, known to be offenders to both dioceses, 46 in number, and we and you made an effort to get that name and that list made public, and that was to be made public in this trial that we had hoped to have on your case. And now that we will not have a trial of your case, what do you have to say about this all?
I'm disappointed. When I first met Jeff, he explained to me that this is not an easy road, that you just don't explain that you're a victim and that they'll step up and do the right thing. And I told him that I'd go to the end. Our end came sooner than I wanted it to, without the outcome I wanted it to, because in the process, when I learned about this list of priests, I couldn't get my hands around it. I don't know how you get your hands around this. I was thinking this morning, what do you want to say when you get up there? And I want to pose questions. I want people to think about how as a nation did we rally and say, go after Penn State? I bet you Jerry Sandusky is sitting in jail going, son of a gun, I should have been a priest. I would have gotten away with it. I'd have my living paid for. No one could touch me. And all these suits would go away. Heck, he'd probably be coaching another couple of years in another parish priest football. I mean, it blows my mind. The hold that the institution of the Catholic Church, and mind you, I grew up as Irish Catholic as you can. I was the first altar boy in that church. It was a really important part of our lives. Everything was that church. My dad is still a trustee on that parish. Our relationship is never going to be the same. I don't understand their support. They don't understand me wailing away from it. And when you have someone that you play golf with and you play racquetball with and you have a stature in the church community because you're that kid that I could go into the rectory, I had carte blanche. Me and the janitor had about the same access to that church building. That was a feather in your cap. And then all of a sudden, the real motives come out. It's a shock. And when I came to Jeff, this whole journey has never been about money for me, ever. And I've told that to Jeff at every step of the road. It's always been about changing their policy. It's always been about protecting the kids. There's 46 priests on a list, and I tell my friends who are still Catholic, are you prepared when your child is an adult and they come to you and they tell you what happened? Are you prepared to answer that question? Because the priest you sit them in front of, you don't know. I certainly didn't. He was charismatic. Look at that grin. He knew how to work it. And they all do. And is there any other part of our society where we can knowingly hide a pedophile, knowingly move a pedophile, and still get the amount of support that they get? I can't think of one. It wouldn't happen in a school. It wouldn't happen at a daycare. It wouldn't happen in an office building where they had volunteers or underage kids doing any sort of activity. How many of you all went through background checks for your jobs? To be a priest means you have carte blanche in our Catholic society. It's wrong. That's what this has always been about. And they're masters at hiding behind the law. You saw it in the letter. They plan, they scheme. They know how to duck and hide. But yet from the pulpit, they'll preach morality. Doesn't make sense to me. I don't know how they can do it. But they continue to do it. And so there's 46 priests out there somewhere, probably more, who innocent children are getting placed in front of. And people have asked me, why didn't you just settle this case? Why did you sit for 17, 16 hours in a mediation day and walk away? Because I didn't want to give a dollar figure. I wanted a list presented, and I wanted changes in policy. Had they done that, Jeff would have been out of a job at that point, because my quest would have been done. But they didn't. They kept wanting, how much money, what is it going to take, what's it going to take? And I didn't. I said, we're obviously on different pages here in the different books. And then after, you may have all recalled, then they came back and sued me for money to cover their costs. So it's always about money for them. It's not about protection. It's not about protection of kids. Protection of priests, yes. I don't know how God looks down and smiles in any sort of favor on this institution when the privacy of priests and the protection of priests oversee the protection of kids. I don't understand that. I don't know how any logical, sane, educated, and or uneducated person, for that matter, could look at that situation and go, makes sense. Let's take a man who has knowingly abused children and move him around. His first victim was victimized 6 years before I was born. Why on God's green earth did our life paths cross? There is no rational reason for that. If he was a little league coach and he abused a child in 1961, he would have never met Jim Keenan in 1981. Ever. It would have never happened. But in the Catholic Church, absolutely. That's how it works. A new parish. Where did they send him? Parishes with young kids. Burnsville-Apple Valley in 1980, that was still a young community. That was 8th grade.
What do you think of, now you hear Mr. Fitzpatrick talking about how he knew about it, tried to go. Did he try hard enough, you think? Could he have done anything more?
I could never in a million years sit here and second guess him. That's not even a question I'm going to venture into. I think he went to the people that he had to go to. He went to the and ultimately you have people like that gentleman and who should have done something different. I think I've just met this man when I walked in the room, but I'm going to venture to guess that he's second-guessed himself enough, and he's gone through it enough, and he's looked at it enough, and he did everything he could at that. I believe that we do the best we can at any given moment with our options at that moment. The church needs to step it up. If they're satisfied with that being their best, wow. It's a protection of assets. That's what they're after. I didn't ask for money. I asked for policy change. I asked for priests who touch children inappropriately not get to do that. Do you think that should have taken 8 years in Supreme Court action to get that even done? And we didn't get it done. That blows my mind. I don't get it. Nobody in this room can sit there and if you're listen to your heart, say, why is that so hard? Why are these leaders of faith so blind to the concept that they have the ability to greatly enhance safety in their faith communities? But instead they chose not to. They blatantly chose not to. That doesn't make sense. I question parishioners who go in every week to support this organization. My mom once asked me, are you ever going to go back? And I said, absolutely not. And she's worried I won't get into heaven. I'm fine with my options of getting into heaven. I think I'm going to be okay there. And I asked my mom, I said, you know, and at the time my boys were younger, I said, if Whelan and Braden were abused at a kinder care, would you be upset with me for not giving kinder care my business anymore? And she said, no. And I said, think about your answer. We give this church our honor and our patronage, this community, to a sick organization. They're not far off mob mentality. Protect ours at any cost. And let the chips fall where they may. And they've got some legal grounds to do it in the state of Minnesota. So the other question I have is, how do we start to let our legislators know that our law is wrong? Do you really think that a criminal who abuses a child should just have to wait a certain amount of years and then they can go, got away with that one? That's what we do in the state of Minnesota. That's not fair. I shouldn't have to be a 45-year-old man still fighting for the concept of children need to be safe. That shouldn't be a fight in our society. It should be a given. Because guess what? One of these days, those children are going to be at the end of our feeding tubes. And did we treat them right when they grew up? Did we give them everything they needed? Because we're certainly going to expect it when they're the ones feeding our tubes. And I think it's not too much to ask to put kids first. So I would love a sit down with the Pope or anybody and have them explain to me their rationale for not protecting children. So I can go on I've got a lot of energy on this topic, so I can go on for on and ever. So if anybody has any questions, feel free.
What's the policy change you want? I mean, you said policy change. What specifically you want to see happen?
I want them to live like the rest of us. I have a staff of 47. We work in mental health. We deal with children with special needs. If a staff of mine touches a child, they don't get to go in front of another child. My first call is to 911. They're going to go to the police. I'm not going to investigate that. St. Paul Police, the Minneapolis Police, Hopkins, whatever community it happened in, they have detectives. That's their job. We'll just start there.
And the policy change that he demanded in this case and put as a first and number one priority was that the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis and the Diocese of Winona publicly disclose the names of each of the credibly accused offenders that they had investigated and determined to have sexually abused minors. That they disclose the lists that they have kept secret. Policy change number 2, that they disclose the history that is documented pertaining to each of the known offenders that are in their files, just like those documents we just showed you. so that the public can know what has happened in the past and how the archdiocese and the archbishop and the bishops have failed to protect the kids in the past so they don't do it in the future, and that they implement mandatory disclosure of the crimes in the past, both to the public and to the police, and that all those files go to the public and to the police. And when they refused to do that, which they did, Jim Keenan said, we're going to court. And that has been the road that he has been on until yesterday, when the Minnesota Supreme Court said he's too late. The statute of limitations has expired. And it's that same statute of limitations that has protected the Archbishop, Archbishop Carlson, and Tom Adamson from any measure of accountability to this day. And it's a sad day. It also happens to be the day after Monsignor Lim, the undersecretary to the Archbishop in Philadelphia, that was sentenced and criminally convicted for willfully endangering children under the Archbishop in Philadelphia. And a week after, Penn State commissioned a report that revealed the long-term cover-up by top officials. What a contrast that is to what we are experiencing here in Minnesota and at the top of the hierarchy. And it is alarming. And as Jim Keenan and Jim Fitzpatrick speak today, they speak out of conscience. And you may have had the case dismissed, Jim, by the court now, but you haven't lost your voice. And the quest for truth. And Jim Fitzpatrick, you may have reported to no avail in the 1960s what you knew, and you may have prevented Adamson from getting assigned to guardian angels, and you did, and you may have held the full truth until recently, but now you've spoken out of conscience. And to both of you, I am deeply grateful to stand with you and permit you to speak this truth. Any other questions?
Jim, where do you go next? This case could have opened up doors for so many others just like you. What's next for you?
As you can tell, I like to talk, and I'm going to talk. I've been cautious through this last 6, 7, 8 years because of the court proceedings and wanting to follow the rules and everything, and they're gone now. So every opportunity I get to talk, you're going to hear me talk about the slimy procedures that they follow.
Mr. Anderson, what is the message? And also, Mr. Keenan, what's the message that you guys interpret from the Supreme Court decision yesterday?
Well, the message we take from the Supreme Court is that the law in Minnesota is wrong. It prioritizes the protection of offenders and those that choose to protect them over the safety and well-being of children, and that the statute of limitations, an old law, as at least has been interpreted here, is making the wrong choices and is wrong. And so now the legislature has to speak to this. And the legislatures and the lawmakers and the public and the people concerned about the protection of children in Minnesota, as they are across this country, need to urge them to pass a new law that says that there is an opportunity for Jim Keenan and other kids to come forward and hold those responsible for these crimes and enable these crimes accountable. And until that law is passed into law, Archbishop Neinstedt and the bishops across the country and Archbishop Carlson will continue to operate above the law with impunity, keeping secrets, choosing to protect themselves, their reputation, and putting their brand and their well-being and their reputation over the safety of our children in our communities. They will continue to do today and tomorrow what they did for decades with Adamson and allowed to be done to Jim Keenan as a kid. That's what needs to happen, and it needs to happen now.
Will it be doing anything else, like take this to the national, to the Supreme Court?
The legal avenues for Jim Keenan's case are at an end. The Supreme Court has spoken, and on his case, it's over. But the cause is not, and he hasn't lost his voice, and he and we will continue to speak to the issue of child protection in every way, in every day we can, and armed with the courage of the survivors that have spoken, and people like Jim Fitzpatrick, who courageously came forward, who would have testified at this trial, and who would have told about how the bishops in Winona refused to act on his reports, and how the bishops in the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis chose to continue to conceal and protect and operate above the law and protect themselves. And so that's what we'll do.
So what are the things that you have prepared for that case if it would have gone to the Supreme Court? Then, Mr. Fitzgerald would have been, one of the witnesses.
If the case had not been thrown out of the courts by the Supreme Court on the statute of limitations, we would have been back in trial. We've been allowed to call Jim Keenan as a witness. We would have been allowed to call Jim Fitzpatrick as a witness to testify under oath before a jury and let a jury decide what should be done here in terms of accountability, and could have exposed the truth that we speak to today. And through that exposure of that truth, it would be our hope, and it still is, that public policy will move behind the speaking of that truth.
Mr. Fitzpatrick, you kind of did the same thing that a lot of the people involved in the church seem to have done, right? You heard about the abuse and you told your superiors and they said, forget about it. Do you feel culpable in some way that you should have gone to the police way back then?
From hindsight,
Yeah.
probably so. Yeah.
How come you didn't?
To be very honest, I was afraid I'd lose my job.
And to be very honest, he would have. I've been working with survivors like Jim Keenan for 29 years. I can count on one hand, in thousands of cases of cover-up by Catholic hierarchies of sexual abuse. On one hand, priests that spoke out critically against the bishop and told the truth, or were willing to report it beyond the internal culture. I can count on one hand in 29 years, the number of priests that were able to do that. And why? Because they were cowered by position, pay, privilege, pension, and power. And they were overwhelmed by it.
You say you have this list, and you've seen it, right, Jeff?
Yes.
Are there names on there that we wouldn't have heard before?
Yes, there are names on the list that none of you know. There are names on that list that none of you have heard. There are names on that list, and we don't know where they are in the community, whether they're teaching in schools, whether they're teaching at the Boys and Girls Club, where they are in our communities, and we haven't been able to track them all. Some of them are dead, but a lot of them aren't. And some of those names are known, and as soon as we get a name and we have the ability to make it known, we make it known. That list that was turned over to us, we immediately moved the court to release it to the public. The court said, no, We went back again and asked it be released to the public. The court said, no, you have to wait till trial. Now that we're not having a trial, I still have that list. We got the decision yesterday. I'm going back to court. And I'm bringing an action and doing everything we can to get those names out there. So today is the beginning of a new day to do what we continue to do with Jim and others like him to try to get those names out there.
And are any of them still actively working as priests that you know?
No. None of the names on the list, the priests that we are tracking are all under suspension. Some work in various positions, administrative positions, but not as priests with faculties as priests. Because if they were, I'd be screaming from the treetops, wouldn't I? I would.
So you can still use this list to help go after those people. You just can't disclose it. You can use
We're not. Well, we've already disclosed the ones that we have liberty to disclose. We have not been able, because we're under court order. I'm an officer of the court. To not disclose the names, and as a citizen concerned about the well-being of those kids, I'm going to continue to do everything as a citizen lawyer to get it out. Any other questions? Thank you, Jim Keenan. Thank you, Jim Fitzpatrick.